Now we move over to our next speaker, who's a regular here at Quant, Paul Wilmott, researcher, consultant, and lecturer on quantitative finance. Paul, welcome.
Hi, thanks very much. Hi. Should I speak in English? Because we don't have a choice. I'm sorry about that. Right. Usually when I stand up at these events, I know what I'm talking about. Now, you may disagree with that, but I think I know what I'm talking about. This is unusual in that I really, really do not have a clue what I'm talking about today. Which round does this go? I'm actually talking about the work of a colleague, a friend of mine, David Orrell. I'll explain in a second how David Orrell does not know any finance. He also uses some ideas from quantum physics, and he doesn't know any quantum physics. So you can see this is good. This is going in a good direction, right? He came up just using the power of his brain with a mathematical model for how volatility behaves, and he called it Q-variance. I'm going to explain what that model is in a second. I'll talk about the statistics of this. What I want from you guys, not today, but eventually somebody, to help me or help him build up a continuous time model, a way of simulating his model. Because if you can't simulate his model, then you can't use it for risk management or for derivative pricing, etc. So that's kind of the goal of what's going on here. I couldn't come up with my own version of his model that could be used for simulation. So I ran a competition on my website, wilmott.com. And we had lots of entries. And I'll explain about those entries in a second, about whether they were successful or not. I've also spoken to lots of quants about this. And as you'll see, not very successfully. So the goal of today is, can you take this model and come up with a simulation of what it's all about? All right, so what's it all about? Oh, before all of that, I need my own disclaimers. I am not a physicist, hence anything about quantum stuff I do not understand. I've tried, but I don't know, I'm getting too old or something, but I can't understand. I'm also not a statistician. So any statistics that's involved here, and there's lots of stats, there's lots of stochastic calculus, there's lots of quantum stuff, there's lots of probability, lots and lots and lots of stuff. I could fill, I don't know, 1,000 pages with the sort of stuff David Orrell has done, but fortunately there's only actually one bit of mathematics here. So I won't go into the gory details. I am very trusting, though. That's one good thing about me. I kind of believe what he's saying. He's a very clever chap, despite not knowing any quantum mathematics or finance or etc. Right. The key thing here, really, is the difference between what physicists do and what finance people do. So this follows on very nicely from the previous talk. Classically, in physics, as you know, Einstein would do, for example, you have some kind of thought experiment, and you come up with some prediction, and then decades go by, and eventually your prediction is proved to be true. Fantastic. That's not what happens in finance. What happens in finance is usually people come up with some mathematical model for something like volatility, and it's usually very similar to somebody else's model in volatility, and they choose it not because it matches data. They choose it because usually there's a nice formula associated with it, and it usually involves lots of complicated mathematics, and you can write lots of research papers about it, and if you're very lucky, people will attach your name to mathematical model, so you were assured some sort of, you will last, your name will last through the centuries, etc. And then maybe eventually somebody tests your model against data, and they say, well, you know what, this model doesn't actually work. It doesn't match the data. At which point, everybody who's using the model says, well, okay, maybe it doesn't match the data, but everybody else is using the model, so we should be using the model. Okay? That is exactly what happens in finance, completely different from what happens in physics. So the key thing, the thing that impressed me about this was the way David Orrell, as I say, just pure thought, came up with some model and eventually tested it, and he found that it matched the data. That's the key thing, it matched the data. He didn't go backwards. He wasn't trying to make a name for himself. He wasn't trying to publish papers and be famous. I did ask him to explain to me, because I wanted to talk about the mathematics of this. I wanted to understand the mathematics myself. And, well, I asked him, what's the simplest way of, the simplest mathematics? And he goes on about transaction costs and infinite well problems and his quantum finance and, pages and pages of maths later. And I quite frankly, it's too much for me, okay? So I'm not going to bore you with that either. This is what he found. This is what his brain came up with, his quantum finance, his Schrodinger's cat, and all that kind of stuff. It came up with the following, which looks kind of boring, but it's actually not. He came up with the following prediction, and it's to do with volatility. It's about the expected variance given return. Now, what do I mean by that? You have the share price bouncing around over some period, let's say just 5 days. Share price bouncing around over 5 days. And you can look at the volatility, the variance over those 5 days. And over that 5 days, there's also a total return. So the stock price is, bounced around, there's your variance, and it's got a certain return. What he found was there's a relationship, a simple relationship between the variance over that 5 days, or the average variance. You divide your 20 years worth of data into 5-day chunks. You look at the variance over each of those 5 days, look at and plot it against the return over each of those 5 days. All right? I'll show you some plots in a second. And so it's there done in a spreadsheet. What it looks like. You've got the S column is just share prices. You've got the returns. Z is the total return over those, in that case, 10 days, and the variance of those 10 days. Now, so he had this relationship. Now, this is interesting. Well, first of all, let's say why you think it's not interesting, because it just looks like a kind of smile thing. You've got some quadratic relationship there between the average variance and the return, which if you come from a derivatives world, options world, you look at that and you think, well, that's just a smile, isn't it? It's a quadratic, so what? Every model has got a quadratic-ish sort of behavior. Well, no, it's not that. That is not what this is. Several things. First of all, it's nothing to do with derivatives. It's not a smile. This is not implied volatility against strike, that kind of thing. This is your actual volatility, the actual volatility of the stock, nothing to do with options, no implied volatilities, actual volatility against the return. But one of the key things about this, lots of key things. First of all, there's only one parameter. There's this sigma squared in there, which is that's a constant. That's sigma squared to the right of the equal sign is a constant. It's some number. It's 0.13 squared or something. And then it's plus a half times this scaled return squared. There's no parameter in there. This is a really weird thing about this. You'd expect, you mentioned about how many parameters you have and fitting and calibration. He's come up with a model that only has one parameter in it. That's strange. I mean, surely there should be a lambda or something in front of the z squared, right? Anyway, also another thing is it works for any t. So I talked about 5 days, 10 days, 20 days, 100 days, 500 days. It scales. Okay? So that's the key thing about this. And I'll show you the results in a second and why it's a bit strange. So it has just the one parameter. That's one thing. Heston, the very famous, one of the most popular models, volatility models, is the Heston stochastic volatility model. Why is Heston popular? Is it because Heston looked at lots of data and it came up with, a model that matched data? No. His model is popular because there's a formula. The PDE that you get, you can solve. And that's what happens always in quant finance. I mean, maybe Black and Scholes are responsible because when they derived their PDE, eventually they were able to solve it and found a closed form solution. So we kind of always expect our models to have closed form solutions. Anyway, that's why his model is popular, but it has 4 parameters at least. As I say, the coefficient of that z squared is always a half. That's weird. It's the same for all time periods. And it's the same for stocks, indices, currencies, all sorts of things. Doesn't matter what the underlying is. So let me give you an example of the kind of models that we usually use. For example, suppose you just start off with a constant volatility log normal random walk, and you just do a simulation. And then you plot the things I've just mentioned. You plot the expected variance against, or the variance against the return. And here's an example. This is just me doing a simulation of a constant vol model. And what you see is a little bit of randomness, obviously, in the volatility, but it is basically a flat line. All right, and there are I've done a time scale of 20 days and a time scale of 80 days. So whatever time scale you have, you'd have a flat line. Okay, that's just constant volatility. So then you look at something like the S&P 500 and do exactly, just use S&P 500 data. And this is what you get. You see the red line is the quadratic, the dots are the individual periods, and the black line is is the average. And you see for 5 days, 10 days, 20 days, 40 days, it hasn't changed. Nothing's changed. It's the same sigma, this one parameter, sigma, this constant. And the quadratic always has this coefficient of a half, right? Regardless of the timescale that you use. Okay, great. What else? Apple, Amazon, gold, Bitcoin, Dow Jones, FTSE. Now they all have different sigma squared, this constant. Like you can see for Bitcoin, for example, it's much higher up. It's much higher volatility. But it's still a half return squared. Now, I'm not hearing any gasps from the audience yet. But this is the point where you should start gasping. He hasn't had to do any of this calibration stuff. The only calibration he has to do is find this base level for volatility. Okay. What about other models? Could other models capture this? So here's a very simple example. This is doing simulations of 2 things. First of all, the just constant volatility. That's the origin line along the bottom. The vertical axis is this coefficient of z squared. So I just did some best fit thing. And you can see for the S&P 500, that's the top line. It moves around a bit, but basically it's around about the 0.5 level. Take something like jump diffusion. Because jump diffusion, for example, will give you all sorts of quadratics. But of course, jump diffusion, it kind of decays. It becomes, in the long term, it becomes just log normal. And so you can see that in this coefficient of the quadratic, the green line, it is going down to 0. So pretty much anything you do will end up looking log normal. Any of the classic models will end up looking log normal. Whereas that half coefficient of 1/2, not lambda, but 1/2 is there forever. All right, so now, as I say, I don't understand the maths behind this, but I can just about do the statistics. I can do the analysis. And I found it seems to be robust. But is it real? Is it real? Is it already in the literature? I know a bit about volatility models, but I don't know every volatility model that's out there. So I asked lots of famous quants, for example. We hear a lot of, oh, that's interesting, and then nothing happens. I emailed one person who's really hot on this topic. He didn't even bother replying to me. And the outcome of today will be, yeah, that's interesting, and then tumbleweed, crickets. No. So I ran a competition on my website. Can anybody simulate this? So this is what the results of that competition. First of all, nobody said it was nonsense. One of the outcomes of this is it could be, you could say to me, Paul, yeah, everybody knows this, and it's not real, or it's baloney, or you're just a useless statistician. David doesn't know what he's talking about. It could all be nonsense, all right? I don't know, maybe it is. Anyway, the competition results. So, for example, we had some people at Bloomberg under Bruno De Pia doing some things. They first of all played around with things like the classic Garch model. And the Garch model has this quadratic thing going on, fantastic. But remember that key thing, this scaling with the time scale over which your data is divided up into. It just disappears. The quadratic disappears, it all becomes flat, just like the jump diffusion. Okay, so Garch is not working. They tried Heston. Heston can give you some sort of behavior, but no, it's not the same at all. And it has loads of parameters, which is really disappointing. What else? Oh, some people did some reverse engineering. Actually, when I say some people, about 2/3 of the people who entered the competition did some reverse engineering. And several problems with the reverse engineering. They could get, they could do a simulation they could get this quadratic thing just about with really serious tweaking of the parameters, of which there are many. But the key thing is none of them could get this sort of behavior in data, a simulation in data over, say, 20 years or so. They could only ever get this by doing simulations that ran to 4,000 years. Okay? So far, nobody has managed to, it was all inverse gamma distributions and regime shifting. So they're really, given how simple the result was of David's model, it just feels like they're going to a lot of work, inverse gamma distributions, regime shifting, loads and loads of parameters. It seems like a lot of work to get something so simple. So that's where we are at the moment. And as I say, it could all be baloney, could all be complete nonsense, what he's got here. Because he uses this quantum model, it sort of only seems to work, and this is where we need him to explain it. It only seems to work over. He has to somehow treat time intervals or transactions during time intervals as in some special way, which I don't understand, and that's why we can't do a continuous time simulation. But you see why you need a simulation. You need to do something in continuous time, because everything we do in finance, the mathematics is continuous time. You need to, if you're going to say, for example, apply any of this to derivatives valuation, then you're thinking in terms of, I'd like to do some hedging, but to do hedging, you need a continuous time model, or at least a discrete time model, what happens over daily period, something like that. But we haven't been able to do anything like that. So are there any interested statisticians, quantum finance people, etc., in the audience? Or anyone got any students without a project? Because this is driving me crazy, because I get emails from David every day with more and more mathematics in them. I think he's on his second book on this subject, about his 10th research paper. And as I say, I'm sort of trusting. I get lots of emails from crazy people, right? There's even, I don't know, I even get emails from people in prison. Seriously, there's things I can't tell you about some of these people, but they involve letters and green ink, mathematics written literally in green ink, just like you'd expect from someone in prison. I get those. So I'm kind of used to getting correspondence from crazies. There's so many things going through my head now that I really want to say, but I just cannot, for all sorts of reasons. But I don't think this is crazy. I think there is something here. And part of this, the interesting thing, is so different. I don't know whether that makes it somehow threatening or something to people. It's so different. There's also been a lot of attempts to apply different types of theories from physics to finance, some of which are successful and some of which are not successful. And this one's interesting because it's somebody who actually knows as I say, I'm sure he'd agree with me, he doesn't know any, or he didn't know any quantum physics when he started out. Anyway, so that's it. So as I say, don't know what I'm talking about, but there's something strange here, and it's all captured within this absolutely trivial relationship between expected variance and return. And it's just there. Even with Bitcoin. I don't know what half these companies are, but it's always there. For all timescales. For all timescales, up to 1,000 days. Dividing 20, 30, 40 years up into 1,000-day chunks, it's still there. But almost certainly. Yes, but why is it used by traders? Do they know why they're using it? No, that's a very common thing. Yeah. Oh, yeah. What's causing it? As I said, it's based upon something to do with transactions and springs and quantum things and cats. Always cats. Okay. There's always a cat. So. Yeah. Anyway, so thank you very much for listening to this complete nonsense.
Thank you so much, Paul Wilmott. And I bet that we're going to get more out of your mind during the lunch break. Maybe what you didn't tell us now will come out later on during the day. Thanks so much, Paul. And